What is up, y'all? Welcome back to another Fish the Moment live stream. Sorry for the technical difficulties that caused the delay. I was having some issues with my hard drives, but we are good to go. So, welcome to tonight's live stream. Randy and I today are going to be talking about some of the most common phrases that you hear about bass fishing that are actually completely wrong, or at least not fully accurate, that will actually get you in trouble. We're going to be going through them, breaking them down, explaining how they may actually be hurting your fishing rather than helping them, and how you can actually adjust those sayings to actually give you good advice to help you put more fish in the boat. Randy, how's it going tonight?
Doing good, Johnny. Just got back from Stockton Lake for an on-the-water lesson with one of our viewers tonight, Eric Payne. Hey, Eric, had a great time today with you. And a little cold out there today in the 20s this morning, but it's a fun day on the water.
That's awesome. Glad you were able to get out there. I heard the water temperature dropped like 10 degrees over the week. So that's getting right down the jerkbait territory for you, Randy. I know you're excited about that.
It's just starting to get there. It's just we're running about, I'm going to guess, 3 weeks behind schedule this year as far as water temperature goes, and it's sort of neat because you can see as the water temperatures drop, you can see the progression of the fish as far as how they're moving in different ways, and it's just part of the yearly cycle, man.
For sure, and it's gonna be cool because I'm excited to kind of do some videos with you this winter, Randy, about your shallow jerkbait fishing versus my offshore fishing, and seeing how all that'll work out. There's going to be some really good content coming, so definitely check that out on both of our YouTube channels. But before we get into the main topics tonight, Randy, you got to give a couple shout outs to our sponsors. First, as always, our main sponsor, Bridgeford Foods. Bridgeford makes some of the best beef jerky in the industry. If you guys need a great snack on the lake when you're going fishing or just anywhere out in the outdoors, check out some Bridgeford beef jerky at your local Walmart or some gas stations. And I have actually had to make another order of Bridgeford beef jerky from them because I go through so much of it as I'm on the lake. It's some great stuff, and it's the perfect easy snack when I'm sitting there graphing or when I'm in between casts. You can just have a few pieces in your pocket or whatever and eat them while you're making between casts. So it's a great little snack, and it's definitely something you should check out. I know Randy's a sponsor. We have Matt Steffen on as well. We got 3 Bridgeford pros, and we all love the products, and they also support us. So if you guys want to help support companies that support Fish at the Moment and support bass fishing in general, Bridgeford is a great one right there. And then one other thing really quick is our second sponsor, the Bass Tank. The Bass Tank's out of Tulsa, Oklahoma. They are a great company for bass fishing installation and basically anything electronics. And they actually have a great sale right now, guys. If you head to their website, thebasstank.com, and go to their holiday sales. If you're in the market for forward-facing sonar like live scope, things like that, and you haven't pulled the trigger yet, you can actually pick up a Garmin UHD 93SV for $699, and then a live scope bundle for $2,100. So for $2,200, you can get the entire bundle, live scope with the unit for $2,000. That's an absolutely killer deal, and it's one of the best deals you're going to find out there in the industry. So definitely take advantage. They're going to be doing this through the holidays, through the end of the year, so definitely check that out. And it's really one of the best ways I can see getting into live scope. It still costs pretty costly, pretty expensive, but if you can save yourself, $500 to $700 on it, that is not a bad deal right there at all. And you can tell your wife that maybe if you can get this now, you can spend the $500 you save on her for something, maybe for her Christmas gift. That might be a little strategy you could use. Who knows? But I know, Randy, you're not biggest live scope guy, but you know that they've been tearing them up on Table Rock Lake, and it's getting to the point on a lot of these wintertime tournaments, if you don't have the live scope, you're not going to be competitive.
No, that's just the way it is. When you're dealing with a lake in the wintertime that has water visibility over 3 feet, you cannot compete without a live scope. It's physically impossible to do it. You can get a check, but you're not going to win the tournament. Those live scopes, they're basically exposing a population of fish in the wintertime that live in that deep water suspended that nobody knew. You'd occasionally catch one on a jig and spoon or something, just fishing over the top of trees. But these guys that are using them are becoming so proficient at using them, know where to use them, know how to set them up and everything, that it's a total, complete domination under certain situations.
For sure, for sure. Awesome. And then one other thing I wanted to call out really quick, guys, just as a helpful tip to all you viewers. I'm actually going to make a YouTube video about this, but one thing that I always take advantage of every single year is on tacklewarehouse.com, there are 25 days of savings. And I'm sure a lot of you guys know about this already, but you can go and basically every single day through the next 25 days, you're going to get some really great deals on a lot of different products. I'm going to make a video about the top 5 products that I found in this that I think are just an absolute steal. But one thing I just see already here is if you want to pick up some Seagar fishing line, you can usually pick up some of the jumbo spools. And I do this literally every single year. I'm going to place my order here in the next couple days once some more of these deals open up. And I always take advantage of these 25 days of savings. I've been doing it for like 5 years now. And so if you ever need fishing line, I get a lot of my treble hooks and baits, things like that. You get 30% off a lot of products, up to 70% off on other stuff. So it's just a great deal. And I'm actually working with Tackle Warehouse now with an affiliate link, but I was buying stuff off Tackle Warehouse way before that and taking advantage of this 25 days of savings even when I was in college years ago. And if you do want to help support Fish the Moment and check out some of these savings, appreciate if you headed over to our website, fishthemoment.com, went to the Support Fish the Moment tab, and used the Tackle Warehouse affiliate link right here. Just click on that link, and you can actually bookmark that link to your bookmarks bar. And if you bookmark it, every single time you open up the website, it'll have my little affiliate link tag on it. And then every purchase you make on Tackle Warehouse, I'll get a small percentage of the profit. So not only are you getting really good deals and saving some money, but you're also supporting Fish the Moment along the way. So that's just one of the simplest ways you can support us guys here is using our Tackle Warehouse affiliate link. If you're buying tackle anyways, it's just something that helps us out a ton. So that is all right there. Good deal. And then I know we have a lot of announcements here. We're going to get into the main topic here in just a second, guys. But I do want to talk a little bit about the app. I know last week on the live stream I talked about Deep Dive, the new app that I'll be launching here very soon. And you can go to our website, deepdiveapp.com. And you can check out the new app. We had a public beta that we opened up, and due to overwhelming responses, we had to close down the beta just because we didn't have enough room for everyone to test it and to, do all of our testing. We just couldn't have everybody in there, so we had to cap it. We capped it after like 4 hours after I announced this beta, which is crazy. And so really appreciate everyone who has signed up, who has tested out the app. We would really appreciate any feedback you guys have, whether you took it out to the lake and tried it, how successful were you with it. I did hear one guy said he took it out and caught a 7-pounder the first day he used it, so that was pretty solid right there and caught some really good fish. But definitely let us know what you think. Any sort of feedback, positive or negative, is helpful, and you can actually send us that feedback down here at help@deepdiveapp.com if you use the app, and it's just super useful to get that so that we can continue to improve the app, and that's really our goal with this, is we want to make this one of the best fishing strategy tools on the market if we can help you take into account a lot of the variables, weather, current, water level, water temperatures, things like that all play together but are kind of complicated to think about all at once. That's what this app does. It has an algorithm that basically forecasts what the best patterns should be, both with your baits but also your structure, your cover, retrieve, everything like that. So we'll have more information about when the app is launching here in the near future, so stay up to date here just at the Fish Moment live stream. I'll be giving updates here weekly on that, but I appreciate everyone who signed up for the beta, and we are excited to get that finished up for you guys as soon as possible. There we go. Let's go and just see what everyone's saying. And Timo says he's got some Versacross for stocking stuffer, and saying that I've submitted one issue already. Awesome. Appreciate that, Joe. Any sort of feedback on those little bugs that we can fix before launch are very, very appreciated. Awesome. And then Mike says he's offered some feedback and got an immediate response. There we go. Good deal. Cool. Okay, so Randy, let's jump in. I know there was a lot of stuff at the beginning here. Appreciate everyone standing by with all of our announcements. But let's jump into the heart of the topic here. And the first thing that I want to bring up is a slideshow that I put together of some common sayings that guys say, and you may have heard before, that may not actually be all that truthful. So the first one here that we have is never leave fish to find fish. So, Randy, let's start by talking about this. I want to get your opinion on this statement. Never leave fish to find fish. Do you find this to be true? Is this something that maybe is true some of the time and not all the time? What is your what do you think about when you hear the phrase never leave fish to find fish?
I think that overall that's a great piece of advice, but there are some variables to that, just like what you were talking about there. A lot of it depends on a couple different things. It depends on the potential that the area has to be sustainable. It depends on the size of the fish that you're catching, and it depends on what your needs are. If you're just fishing for fun or if you're tournament fishing, a lot of it, what we're talking about here, you can apply it to some type of competitive fishing, which that's what makes it even a little bit more urgent. But for the most part, here's what I found about that. When you've got an area that's got some biting fish in it, usually you got everything clicking right. You got the right area. You got the timing. You got the right bait. You got the right boat position. You got the right casting angle. It can be a school of fish that you may have found offshore, or it can be a stretch of flooded bushes. It could be a stretch of boat docks, whatever. But fish do not actively bite all the time. So if you're on an area where there's some biting fish on there, I found that it's best to try to completely maximize that area. And when I'm talking about maximizing the area, I'm talking about approaching that area from different angles with different lures, different techniques, different colors, that type of stuff. Because let's say, for example, you're flipping down a row of boat docks and you've got 20 boat docks to fish, and you caught on your first pass through those 20 docks, let's say you caught 7 or 8 fish. Excuse me, like, a fish after every 2 or 3 docks. And you caught them, flipping a 3/8 ounce, brown jig with a Zoom super chunk on it or something like that. A lot of times you can maximize your area by going back through that area and maybe go to a little bit more finessey approach, like a straight-tailed worm, or maybe a finesse jig, or a smaller creature bait or something like that. And then a lot of it is timing. Sometimes, based upon the angle of the sun, that can position those fish at different parts of the area. So if you got an area that has enough cover to hold a large population of fish, that's when you need to really not ever leave those fish. But I'll give you one other situation. Let's say, for example, you were fishing down a stretch of shoreline. It's got 10 laydowns on it, 10 blowdown trees. And, and they're not real complex blowdowns. Maybe they're just a log running into the water. Odds are, if you catch 2 or 3 fish on that stretch, that you picked off a lot of the fish that are there, because you don't have an area that has the complex type of structure to hold a big population of fish versus a stretch of docks or a grass bed, or a thick row of bushes or something like that. So a lot of it just depends on the situation behind it. But overall, you're going to be a lot better instead of leaving an area. Just try to maximize that area with changing techniques and different lure presentations.
For sure. Now, one thing that I've always seen a lot of guys do, and this is something that is, they hear you say those things, Randy, and think, okay, I go through an area and I catch one fish off of a stretch of bank. Well, a fish bit me there. I'm now going to stay here for 3 hours and throw every single bait in the tackle box at those fish. And I think that that's where these guys get into problems with this scenario. So let me just pull up Navionics really quick and just give you an example. I'll give you a shallow and an offshore example. We're just going to use Grand Lakes. We always use Grand Lake. It doesn't really matter for this situation. But let's say that you're on Grand Lake and you just go down a stretch of boat docks, like this stretch of boat docks. And as you roll through here, you catch one fish on this row of boat docks. And it's literally just one fish. In that situation, what I would say is that there's a potential that there are more fish in this area and you're fishing maybe too fast or too slow, or the wrong bait, the wrong approach to catch multiple fish. So if you roll through this pocket and get one keeper bite, and it's a decent one, there's a chance there's more fish in there. But you only got one bite. So it may not be a bad idea to rerun those same docks you just fished with a different bait. but not get too caught up about fishing every single inch of the entire boat dock, every single little nook and cranny. Maybe only spend 15 minutes refishing this area. And if you don't get bit in 15 to 20 minutes, I would recommend moving on, because in that situation, you only got one bite and you're not getting multiple bites. You're not getting a signal where they're biting all the time. Now, on the flip side, if you roll through there with a different bait and catch another keeper in the exact same area, now you might be onto something. You caught 2 bites now, and after your first fish, you've refished it for 15-20 minutes, caught another fish. Maybe then you can make another pass with a slower approach, a different bait, and even catch another keeper. Or, on the flip side, you might roll down your first time and get 3 or 4 keeper bites. If you get 3 or 4 keeper bites on the stretch of boat docks, that means there might be even more fish in there. And then maybe you come back again slow for 15, 20, 30 minutes and you get 1 or 2 more keepers. You come back again, you get 1 keeper. That's when you should keep staying, is if you keep getting bit after refishing those areas in a reasonable amount of time, 10, 15, 20 minutes, maybe 30 minutes at the most. Same thing happens offshore. If you're fishing an offshore ledge, an offshore point, a lot of times you can pull up and you might catch a fish on your first cast, second cast, and third cast. Boom, boom, boom. You just absolutely hammer them for the first 2-3 minutes you're on the spot. Then those fish die off. They don't really bite very well. You might throw that same bait for 10 minutes, switch to a couple other baits. And my rule of thumb offshore is that if I get 3 or 4 bites off a spot really fast, I'll stay there for another 30 minutes and rotate different baits at different angles from different positions to see if I can trigger more bites. And if I keep getting bit 1 bite every 30 minutes, I'm going to stick to that spot. But after 30 minutes and at the most 45 minutes, if I don't get another bite on that offshore area, I'm leaving, because those fish are now no longer biting. Especially if you're changing angle, you're changing baits. If those fish aren't biting, you're literally wasting time sitting there past 30 to 45 minutes, where you could then be trying to find a new spot where you could reignite a new group of fish that might start biting. Now, there's always that fear that someone can come in behind you and maybe catch him an hour after you leave, and that's definitely a possibility. But what I find is that it's usually better to give those fish an hour rest and then come back later. Or if you don't want to leave that spot, back your boat off enough so that you're not right on top of them with your trolling motor, and guard the area and just let those fish chill for a bit and just maybe move a little bit away, enough that if a boat rolls in you can pull back in there really fast, but give those fish a little bit of a break and not just sit there and pound them and hammer them. And I've done that before too, literally pull out in the middle of the pocket here and just wait for those fish to kind of reposition, stay far enough away, 200 feet away, that they'll regroup up. Then I'll move back in if anyone starts getting close. And with that, my rule of thumb is a little bit different from the rule of thumb that we showed earlier, in the sense that a lot of guys say never leave fish to find fish. What I say is never leave biting fish to find fish. This is a very big distinction. They need to add this into the phrase. If you ever hear guys say this, never leave biting fish to find fish. And in my mind, biting fish means that you're getting bit every 30 minutes, maybe at the most every 45 minutes, and you consistently are getting bit. If you go 30 minutes or 45 minutes without a bite and you're changing up baits, you're changing up approaches, those fish are probably not that active anymore. You need to let them rest, back off a little bit, or move areas because you've really thoroughly fished that area. What are your thoughts on that new saying, Randy? Does that ring true to you?
I think that this, that's excuse me, that's a lot more truer than the initial statement goes. The biting fish on there, and you made a good point, Johnny, when you're talking about the whole concept. If you leave, if somebody else is going to come in there and catch them, that is something that happens all the time, and that's one of the things that has burned me the most in tournaments, is where I thought that I've exhausted an area and I left it. And if there's boats around there, they come in there. And I've had many times where guys told me, they said, yeah, after you left, 30 minutes later, they started biting. So one of the important things that you have to realize is that every single area that you're fishing, there's bite windows there. And those bite windows can be influenced by a lot of different factors. It can be current. It can be, cloud cover. It can be time of day. There's a lot of things that can determine that, but the biggest thing that you want to make sure is that you're confident that those fish just aren't biting anymore, and there's no environmental changes that are coming on the way that is going to make that, come otherwise. And that's especially important when you're fishing deeper water structures, the type of areas where those fish can move up and down on, and especially important if you have a combination of offshore structure and current. And if you have current flows that are varying or changing throughout the day. Prime example is a lot of the Alabama lakes. I mean, and the TVA lakes that are really current dependent, and those current flows change with different type of power generation schedules throughout the day. That's one big wrench in this whole equation. And another point I want to make here before we get on the next one is that when you're talking about a lot of anglers that are beginning anglers that are learning about, how to fish and how to know how much time to spend on area or not, I think there's two mistakes that beginning anglers make that maybe everybody, and even good anglers, I'm not just saying beginning anglers, but you have to know the potential of your area as far as the potential that area has to produce, and you can't over or underestimate that. A lot of times a beginning angler can underestimate the area or they can overestimate the area. Just like what you said, Johnny, about somebody catches one fish and they think, well, I'm going to camp here because there's fish here. It's easy to overestimate an area and it's easy to underestimate an area. The only way that you can accurately assess the full potential of an area is having all those factors come together, like the type of cover, the amount of cover, the immediate access to deep water, environmental conditions that come with that. And that's something that comes with just lots of experience on the water or watching lots of YouTube videos, one of the two.
For sure. And one really great comment, one other thing real quick, thanks to Angling Mailbox for the €10 super chat. Appreciate that. Mentioned that Brian Latimer is fishing saltwater over the off season. That's pretty interesting. I don't think I could do the offshore. It's funny because you say offshore fishing. I couldn't do the out in the middle of the ocean fishing where you can't see land. That would scare me too much, to be out in a little tiny boat in that big ocean. I don't know how sailors used to do it back in the day. That is like not something that my nerves would put up with. I'll stick to my lake and my little Triton, and I'll be good right there.
I can imagine, Johnny, if you get with your offshore skills, if you could have some good maps of the ocean, I can't imagine the giant fish you could catch out there applying your offshore structure techniques to the ocean, because I'm sure those ocean fish relate to breaks and drop-offs and, bottom changes. I'm sure it's the same thing for them.
For sure. My rule of thumb is I don't fish for things that are bigger than me. That's always been my rule of thumb. So I'm going to stick with that, and I'll be good right there. So one other question that was really good was from, let's see here. Where was that one? It was from Gabe. Gabe says, what if you're getting bit almost every cast, but they're all 13-inch fish? That is another great question right there, and it's something I think a lot of guys struggle with. I'm going to give an example just from an offshore spot, and then I'll let you, Randy, talk about that for up shallow as well. What I find most of the time when you're getting bit by smaller fish offshore, there are bigger fish around that area unless you're dealing with spotted bass. If you're dealing with spotted bass, usually they'll group up by size and you'll get a lot of small spotted bass. But if you're getting bit by largemouth specifically, those 13-inch largemouth will set up with those 5-pound largemouth. What's happening a lot of times, though, is if we take a look at this point right here that drops off into a creek channel, a lot of times you'll find that those smaller fish will set up on top of these points in, let's say, 10 to 20 feet of water. You can catch them on a football jig, a shaky head, drop shot, Carolina rig, whatever it is, deep diving crankbait. And you get a lot of those 13-inch fish, but you're not catching the quality you need. Most of the time what happens is that there's two things that will go on. The first is that those bigger fish are going to suspend more over the channel. And I've seen this now. I fish offshore so much, guys, that I've seen this happen over and over and over again, where if you graph a spot before you fish it, you'll see that there's a lot of small fish, a lot of small arches and dots up on top of the drop, and all of your bigger fish are suspended out in front of the drops. And I've found that I've been very successful over the last couple of years catching and targeting those suspended fish in certain situations where I catch them on a flutter spoon, a hair jig, a scrounger head swim bait, a single like hollow belly swim bait, all those baits. If you guys see me catch fish on hair jigs, I did that a lot this year in my Catch 15 challenges. Almost every single one of those fish that I catch on those hair jigs are not positioned up on top of the drop up here. They're positioned off the drop, out in front of those drops, kind of just chilling out here. And using your electronics, I just do it with my 2D down imaging. I don't really need live scope for it, but if you have live scope, it can help. But a lot of your bigger fish will set up out in front of these areas most of the day, and then they'll move up on top of these areas in certain key feeding windows. And what you'll find is that if the wind starts blowing, the current starts moving, those fish will move up out of the channel or out from over the channel suspended and move up on top of these drops, and you can catch those bigger fish in small 30-minute windows, 45-minute feeding windows, and they'll be a lot easier to catch. So the two ways to go about it is, if you're fishing a lot of 13 inchers up on top of the drops or an area, try to fish for a suspended fish with a hair jig, flutter spoon, swim bait, Alabama rig, whatever you can. Or if that's not working, try to come back to the area when you have better conditions, wind or current, because those big fish may move up to feed. What are your thoughts on that, Randy?
Well, from a shallow water perspective, there's two things that I found to be true. The first one is a lot of times you can make a bait change, but more often than not, it's an area change. And I'll give you guys an example. We were fishing a FLW tournament at Beaver Lake. This has been about 20 years ago, and the water was really high there. A lot of flooded bushes in the water, and I was fishing the mid lake section down in the little bit clear water, and I was flipping flooded bushes, and I was just whacking them. But I was whacking just non-keepers and barely keepers. I mean, I couldn't. It's like I was getting like probably 50 bites a day, and I was catching 5 keepers, and I was catching 14 inchers. It didn't matter what I pitched in there. I started out pitching a creature bait. I went to brush hog. I went to a full-size jig. It didn't matter. It's like 14 incher would bite a trick worm, or it would bite a full-size half-ounce flipping jig. So I was just catching dinks. And at the same time, Andy Morgan was up the river flipping in the dirtier water about 20 miles away from where I was, and he wasn't getting half the bites, but he was catching 3 and 4 pounders, flipping the same type of bushes I was, just in a different part of the lake. So, and I have seen sometimes that you can make a bait change. Say, for example, if you're catching them on a rattle trap, you might put on a big swim bait and upgrade the size. Most of the time, what I found, if you're catching a lot of dinks in there, you need to make an area change, whether it be water clarity, type of structure that you're fishing. But very seldom is it just all a bait change.
Good deal. And that's the difference between the offshore and the shallow style, because that's, obviously with those offshore fish, you're dealing with more schools of fish versus kind of those wolf pack groups that move in. So it's just a different perspective there too. It's really interesting. Awesome. Some really good comments over here. One is from Dustin Overstreet with a $9.99 super chat. Says, thanks for all the great info and content. Thanks, Dustin. Appreciate the support and glad you enjoy the content. Okay, so that is our first myth, or first saying that we are going to change. So instead of what we had before, never leave fish to find fish, we're going to change that saying from now on. Never leave biting fish to find fish. If you ever hear any one of your buddies at your club saying never leave fish to find fish, you got to correct him. Make sure he adds biting in there, because that is key. Otherwise, it's going to throw off a lot of anglers. Or if you want to spread misinformation so that you can have an edge over your competition, that's your prerogative. But we're going to give you the truth here on Fish the Moment, and then you guys can be sneaky if you want for a competitive edge. But anyways, does that happen a lot, Randy, on tour, guys sharing misinformation? I can't imagine guys like the Doc Talk where they're like, oh, I was hammering him on this or that. Actually, do you have a good story on that? I bet you have a great story where you got fooled by misinformation, or you heard somebody get fooled. There's got to be something.
That used to happen a lot when I was starting to fish, like back in the 80s, fishing tournaments. But it seems like the anglers have evolved past that, and I don't see it that much anymore. I mean, for one thing, anglers, they don't talk to each other that much about specifics. It's real generality type stuff. Like, yeah, I caught 10 today, and most of them are deep. I mean, that's not telling you much. I mean, you can leave a lot of stuff out of there. I find in the tournament realm, it's not necessarily that people lie or spread just false rumors, but they leave out the key elements to what they're trying to how they're catching them, and not necessarily that they're doing it intentionally, but they just don't want to give the real juice up.
Gotcha.
That's why I don't hardly talk to anybody at tournaments. I don't want that in my mind one way or the other.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. By the way, thanks guys for fixing my typo. I had bidding fish instead of biting fish. Thank you guys. I'm normally very good with typos, but for some reason, whenever I highlight words, like I just ignore them. So that's like something I've learned about myself. So I fixed it. Never leave biting fish, not bidding fish. So thank you guys for that. Good deal. And also Cam Martin with the 1999 super chat. Thanks so much, Cam. Really appreciate that. Awesome. So let's get to our next saying, Randy, and let's jump into it. Again, I fixed it here. Yeah, you guys caught me a typo. So, thank you. Next one. They caught them deep today. This is my biggest pet peeve in bass fishing, Randy, especially as an offshore fisherman. They caught them deep today is the most misleading statement ever. And the reason it's one of my pet peeves is because I struggled with this so much when I was like 13 and 14 years old, when I was learning to try to fish offshore. People were saying they caught them deep today, and it sent me on a complete rabbit hole. And part of that was because the lakes around where I grew up are very different. And let me just give you an example of what I'm talking about. If we go to Navionics and scroll out here, we're going to go to a couple of my lakes that I used to fish. So one of them is Lake Washita. And they would always say, oh, there's a great deep bite today. And on Lake Washita, a great deep bite, if you're on, over here in the Blakely area, some guys catch them in standing timber, and the standing timber is in 90 feet of water. So they said they caught them in 90 feet of water. Well, sometimes that means they're catching them over the top of standing timber, that the timber tops out in 30 feet, but it's in 90 feet of water. So right there, that's even a misnomer, because they're only catching them 30 feet deep versus 90 feet. So guys will tell you, oh, they all came out of 90 foot of water today. Really, they came out of 30 feet, but the trees were 60 feet tall in 90 feet of water, so the fish were in 30 feet. But I heard, okay, these guys are catching them 90 feet deep. That's deep, and that's what I got in my head. So then when we went to Lake Dardanelle, and I started trying to learn how to catch them deep on Lake Dardanelle, where did I immediately go? Okay, let me go out here to the main river channel and find areas that are as deep as possible. Let me find these drop-offs from 18 to 28 feet of water. That's where I really want to get. And I want to get here really deep and find these super deep ledges, these super deep creek channel areas, as deep as I can go. And what I found is on Lake Dardanelle, where you have a foot of visibility in the water, maybe a foot and a half at best, most of the fish live deep relative to the rest of the lake. Relative deep, like shallow on Lake Dardanelle, can be in 6 inches of water. Those fish will get super shallow because you have a foot of water visibility. Well, some of my best areas on Lake Dardanelle are not at all deep. They're actually pretty shallow if you think about them. And like here's, for example, one of the really good areas that I've caught fish on over the years. There's a ledge or a drop-off right here where the top of that drop-off, it says here on Navionics that it's 6 feet of water. In reality, some of these spots are in 3, 4, 5 feet of water. And a lot of these deep, quote-unquote, deep areas where they catch them are not deep at all. You might be fishing in 4 to 6 feet of water out in the middle of the lake, and that's considered deep for Lake Dardanelle. It's just a relative term. Here's a really great spot right here. It's a 5-foot little hump. It's out in the middle of nowhere. There's no water around for 100 yards on each side, but those fish will set up in 4 or 5 feet of water, and that's considered a deep spot on Lake Dardanelle. If guys said, man, I caught them deep on Lake Dardanelle, they mean they're fishing offshore. They're not actually fishing deep in 30 feet of water. They're just fishing the top of that little hump in 5 foot of water, and it's just deep relative for Dardanelle. And that's something I've got messed up on for years. And so many guys will hear people talking about the great deep bite that they have on their lake. that deep bite is actually a misnomer. Really, what they're trying to say is, instead of saying they caught them deep today, what they really are trying to say is they caught them offshore today. Now, on some lakes, deep may be a good term, because like on Table Rock Lake, you might be catching them in 50 feet of water for real. But on a lot of lakes, especially lakes that have less than 2 foot of water visibility, deep water might be 7 feet, 8 feet, 10 feet of water. And there's a lot of guys that I know even to this day where I tell them, where should you be fishing? And I say, oh, check out some humps and points in 5 to 8 feet of water offshore. And they're like, whoa, that's super shallow. I've been trying to drag my jig around in 30-foot brush piles laid out by crappie fishermen, and I'm not getting bit. And I'm like, well, yeah, the bass don't get out there because of the water clarity and things like that. They're not living in 30 feet. They get offshore in 8, 9 foot of water. So that is something that is a massive misconception that I think I don't think guys should use the term deep. I would say they caught them offshore today. That's a lot better name than saying they caught them deep today. What are your thoughts on that, Randy?
You said it perfectly there, Johnny. I don't have a lot to add to that. Guy made a good comment there that sums it up too. Deep is relative, and it is, because if you're fishing like say Ross Barnett down in Mississippi or something, deep there can be a 6 to 8 foot deep creek channel versus 2 foot in the lily pad, something like that. So I think the accurate term is just like you said. It's offshore. It's not deep. When you're talking about fishing deep, most people have this visual in their mouth, that visualization in your mind that you're dragging a football head jig in 50 foot of water, something like that. But completely relative, and offshore is a way to go. And by the way, I got a question. What's the deepest fish you've ever caught? I'd be curious. You never told me.
Deepest fish I ever caught, I think, was out of like 77 feet of water on Table Rock.
Oh, yeah, that's got me beat by far.
I watched it on my 2D sonar on my old Humminbird unit. What's the deepest one you caught?
The deepest one I've caught is, probably 50-something feet on a spoon at Table Rock. But my best deep water bite that I ever got, I can tell you about, I was the very first year we fished at Lake Mead. This was back in the 90s. And back then, Lake Mead was crystal clear. Now, there's been, I don't know what's happened to the lake, but the lake is a lot more dirty than it was back in the 90s. But back in the mid to late 1990s, you could see the bottom of 50 foot down. You could see the bottom. I was fishing out through this one deep flat. I looked at my flasher, and it said it was 45 foot deep. And I looked down there, and it's like, there's no way that's 45 feet deep. I can see the bottom perfectly. It's like I can see every rock down there. It was like looking into a swimming pool that was 40 foot deep. So I'm just casting my finesse worm out in front of the boat, looking down there, and I can't see nothing. There's like rocks, and there's not a sign of a bass anywhere. And all of a sudden, I feel a bite, and my line's like 10 foot in front of the boat. And I look down there, and it's like, what the heck, And I set the hook. And as soon as I set the hook, I saw this fish flash off the bottom in 40 foot of water, and I caught it. It was completely blended in with the bottom, even though I could see the bottom perfectly. But that was my one of my deepest bites. I haven't caught many fish, over 45 foot deep. I mean, probably because I'm usually fishing 5 feet deep. That's why.
Yeah, that's one of those tricky deals with the fishing, 50, 60 feet deep. You can't do it on a lot of lakes, but it's an interesting deal. There was a question from Dan how I caught that fish. I caught it on an ice fishing jig on Table Rock. Couple real quick comments here, really fast. Caesar says he signed up for the deep dive app. We literally only had a certain cap on the spots, Caesar, so I apologize. We didn't think we were going to actually get that many people to sign up for the app, just because we were hoping we were just going to get to slowly fill it up, and then we were going to close it off before it got to that point. But we only had a certain number of spots we had available for it, just with the way that it works, and I'm not on the technical side. Basically, there's a certain cap we had, and that's all we could do. So I really apologize if you'd signed up and you got cut from that cap, but it was just we got the first number of people that hit that cap, and that's as many spots as we had. But we are going to be getting that app out as soon as possible to you guys, so definitely be on the lookout here. I'll be making announcements on it. One other comment too, I saw a comment about someone's going to do a review on the app. Just a reminder that the app is in the beta stage. The beta means that we still are doing a lot of improvements, so all the feedback we get from you guys in the app is going to be addressed and changed and stuff like that. So just if you see any reviews or things like that, we're testing stuff. The whole idea with the beta is that it's not the final product. It's a product that we're testing, we're doing things, we're changing stuff around. So it may not be exactly like it is for launch. It will not be exactly like it is for launch because we're just adjusting stuff. So if you see reviews out there where they're like this or that or this or that, just be patient on that, because a lot of the things that we actually have, a lot of the stuff already addressed that we're getting comments on. We already planned on getting those things changed for version 1 launch. So just call out on that. Just be patient on that, and if there's anything that's a little bit weird, we are working to fix it. That's our goal, to get things as clean as possible for the launch. One more super chat from the angling mailbox, €10 super chat. Appreciate that. Talked about a video that Frank Skellish did on BTL about the Potomac River and those creek arms. That's definitely one thing I really would like to do, is do more stuff on tidal fisheries. I've never fished tidal water before. We just don't have any here in the Ozarks, but tidal water always seems pretty fun. Do you like fishing tidal water, Randy?
I love fishing tidal water. I didn't at first until I learned how to fish it, but once I learned how to fish it, I really, really like it. It's a unique situation. And you guys out there that have not ever fished tidal water, there's just nothing else like it. A lot of it depends on how big of a tide fluctuation you have. Some places like the Mobile Delta in Alabama don't have much of a fluctuation. And then you'll go to, some places more up in the Northeast, and they've got a tremendous fluctuation. But it always makes for something interesting. But I really enjoy it myself.
For sure. And then got a couple super chats here. Appreciate that from Martin. For the super chat, appreciate that. And we are also, Dan says that he was late for the beta, but they're adding requests for the public release. There's a lot of lakes. If you guys are sending stuff in, to our help and stuff, for those who weren't able to get in, if you send us lakes, we're adding them to our list to make sure we get all the lakes added in best we can. So all those lake requests are always helpful. And if you do want to send those over to just go to deepdiveapp.com, and you can go to the bottom of the page, and it's help@deepdiveapp.com, our email. You can send us lake requests, and we're getting those added in for launch. So we actually have a lot of the lakes in there already. We're adding them like every single day. So we have so many lakes in this app, guys. We're over 300 or 400 lakes that we have in the app already, and we're adding more every single day. So really good stuff right there. Let's see here. Let's jump back over here. Sorry, guys. There's all kinds of stuff going on. A lot of questions and stuff like that. So let's jump back into comment or our quote. So first quote was, "Never leave fish to find fish." We changed that to "Never leave biting fish to find fish." Number 2 is, "They caught them deep today." That actually means they caught them offshore today. Next one, this is really relevant for the next upcoming months here, Andy. "Fish slow-moving baits in cold water." I'm sure you hear this all the time. This is something that is probably more of an old school advice, but I think a lot of guys still think this. You need to fish slow-moving baits like a jig and a worm and a Carolina rig and a Ned rig, and maybe like throw a jerk bait and let it sit for 45 seconds, stuff like that. You got to fish these dead slow baits when water temperatures are cold. And when I say cold water, I mean like 45-degree water to like frozen. So like maybe like normally it's like 34-degree water temperature to like 45-degree water temperature. That's super cold water. You need to fish slow-moving baits. What are your comments to that, Randy?
Well, I'll share some juice with you guys here that you probably don't know. And this is something that has been hard-earned fishing for 30-some years. There's 2 elements to that that I've seen on there. Number 1, it has to do with the water clarity that you're fishing. And number 2, the time of year. And what I'm talking about there is the water clarity has a lot to do with how fast the fish will move in cold water. If you're fishing in really clear water, well, basically, here's the foundation: the clearer the water that you're fishing, the more the bass will move and the faster they move in the cold water. If you're fishing water visibilities that are like less than 2 feet deep and the water's cold, like in the 40s, and we'll classify cold water in the 40s because if you're down south and the water temperature's in the 50s, those fish don't react the same as they do if it drops down into the 40s, particularly the low 40s. But if you've got water visibility of less than 2 feet, that is when they will not move fast and they don't chase stuff hardly at all when it's dirty like that. But I've seen times where if you've got, say, 10 foot of visibility in a lake and the water temperature is in the low 40s, that, say, for example, if you're fishing a jerkbait or an Alabama rig or swim bait, you can move it at a pretty good pace. I mean, I fish a lot like down in Table Rock on the lower end of the lake in the winter, and normally that's when the water is the clearest. Like I said, Table Rock is not as clear as it used to be, but in the wintertime when the water's low and the water's cold, it gets clear down there. So I fished in some situations where you have 10, 15 foot visibility in certain situations. And in 40-degree water, I have caught a lot of fish on a jerkbait where I basically have not paused it. I've maybe paused it a second or two between jerks, but they will chase a bait in clear water a lot faster than what you think. So use that, number one, as the gauge. The dirtier the water, the slower you need to fish your bait. The clearer the water, you can speed it up. The second variable with that is the time of the year. Here's one thing that I found out about bass movement, bass behavior that I haven't talked about much, is that if you've got cold water in the late winter or the early spring during the pre-spawn time of the year, those bass will move fast even if the water's cold. And what happens is in the pre-spawn or late winter, the bass are more influenced by the increasing number of daylight hours. You know, get from after the winter solstice, it stays lighter 2 minutes later every single day. So by the time you're into February, you may still have water temperatures in the mid 40s, but the bass will, on some biological instinctual level, they will sense that spring is getting closer and that the days are longer, and they will get aggressive and they will move fast and they will chase baits in 45-degree water as it's starting to rise. Now, say, for example, the water temperature is bottomed out around 40 degrees. You get a warming trend towards the end of February, first part of March, and the water warms up 5 degrees and it's still only 45 degrees. I've caught a bunch of fish, like fishing a square bill or a red rattle trap, something like that, fairly fast in 45-degree water during the pre-spawn. Now that won't happen in early winter when that water temperature is going from the 40s into the 50s into the 40s on the drop. It has a negative effect on them. The daylight hours are getting shorter every day, just like they are right now. So those are the two variables I've seen: the time of year and water visibility.
For sure, that is definitely a factor right there. And one thing that I think is fascinating is I actually have caught them, Randy, on the Arkansas River in 36 and 37 degree water temperatures in literal chocolate milk. Like, I'm talking 6 inches of water visibility, because those bass still have to feed. And one thing that's really fascinating is I'll pull up Google Earth. The way I caught them, I actually have a video where I did this on Lake Dardanelle, and I caught them in 40 degree water temperatures. But I've caught them even colder than that, like 36 degree water temperatures. And if you guys fish the Little Rock Pool of the Arkansas River, you'll know kind of where I'm at right here. But you can go up in one of these creeks, and if you come back in here, a lot of times on these river systems, if you can get off the main river just a little bit, you'll just get slightly warmer water. We won't know what's going on there with the clouds. Let me get it better. There we go, historical image. But in this area, we had really dirty water, like 6 inches of visibility. But down this bank, there's a bunch of riprap. And there's riprap around some bridges and stuff like this. And even in this super muddy water, I was catching them on a flat-sided crankbait, whether it's like a KVD 1.5 flat. In this case, I was throwing actually a little hand-carved balsa crankbait that dove like 3 or 4 feet deep. flat-sided, and I'm catching these fish in no more than 3 and 4 foot of water because the center of this creek is like 10 foot of water, so it's not like it's deep. And I was just paralleling these rocky banks. But what I had to do was cast that little flat-sided crankbait out there. It was Chartreuse blackback, and I just reeled it as slow as I physically possibly could while maintaining contact with those rocks. And I made a cast every 10 or 15 feet, kind of just at like a 45-degree angle to that bank like that, and just barely reeled that bait in. And that day I had 5 fish that went almost 13 pounds, 36 to 37 degree water temperatures, middle of January. I mean, it was cold. And the water temperature, or the water visibility, was like maybe 6 inches to a foot at best. So a lot of times what I find is that it's not necessarily even that you need to be fishing slow moving baits. I caught those fish on a crankbait. You can also catch them on a jerkbait. You can catch them on other things. Even if the water clarity isn't great, you can catch them on fast moving baits, quote unquote. You just need to fish super, super slow with those fast moving baits. And as a result, my kind of saying has been that instead of this idea of fish slow moving baits in cold water, I say move baits slowly in cold water. So if your water temperature is super cold, like 34 to 45 degrees, you just need to move your baits a little bit slower. With a jerk bait, maybe instead of giving it a 2-second pause, give it a 5-second pause. I know in the Arkansas River too, when the water is a little bit clear, like 1.5 foot, 2 foot of visibility, I sometimes let my jerk bait suspend for 10 or 15 seconds, and that helps me get bites, especially if that water visibility isn't super great. And then in the situation I talked about earlier, I was catching them on a crankbait, a flat-side crankbait, but I was reeling it as slow as I could to maintain bottom contact. So you don't need to necessarily throw slow-moving baits like a jig, shaky head worm, stuff like that to get bit, and sometimes that's not even the best way to get bit. Sometimes the best way to generate bites is to move bait slowly in cold water, even if it's a reaction bait like a crankbait. Any more comments there, Randy?
Yeah, 12 Ernie asks a good question here. What about cold water with current? Do they act different? They do act different in there. All the situations I fish that have significant current, and a lot of this I fished a lot on the Coosa River chain lakes that have some pretty significant current on the upper ends of the rivers up there. To me, it seems like that those bass are not near as affected if you have some type of moderate to heavy current. It's just, I don't know if they're just stronger or the current, does something to metabolism or something like that. But that is a good question, and it seems like they just don't get lethargic like they do in just reservoirs that don't have much current in them.
For sure, and that's something that's always a factor. I think that current really, those fish don't worry about the water temperature as much with the current. Would you agree with that? That water temperature is kind of irrelevant when there's current.
When I was a kid in high school, I had a 10-foot canoe, and there was a creek here by Joplin, Missouri called Center Creek, and I'd float Center Creek in January, in this 10-foot canoe. I tipped it over one time January in a creek. That was nice. But anyway, you can imagine how cold the water was in this creek in January. It was freezing cold. And we caught a bunch all the time of big spotted bass in that heavy current in the middle of January. The water temperature had to be, no more than 40 degrees. So, yeah, it definitely makes them more aggressive, I think.
For sure. Good deal. Seen some recommendations with some slow roll in the spinner baits. Steve, I wouldn't try throwing a buzzbait in 36-degree water or a popper. Even if they're real shallow, I don't think that's going to work out super well for you. What's the coldest you've caught a fish on a topwater, Randy?
I caught a fish in January at Table Rock about 5 years ago. The water temperature was 38 degrees, but the fish was busting on the surface. And that's the only reason I threw it over there with that. So that's on a pop R.
Oh my God.
So that was a freak situation. There was some shit, for whatever reason, there was shad up on the surface in the middle of this creek over like 30 foot of water. So, that sort of surprised me.
I'm just surprised you had a pop R on your rod in January.
I just had like an oddball. It wasn't on my rod. I tied it on. I had it. It was just an oddball bait I had in the tackle box with me.
Oh man, we need to do that. That's a great challenge. Who first angler to catch a bass on the top water in January on Table Rock Lake? That would be a challenge right there. That's some good
Well,
stuff.
there was one of the a lot of you guys probably know Jeremy Lawyer, and a friend of his. He's telling me about this one friend of his that always throws topwater in the winter, and he says he catches some fish on it in the middle of the winter. I mean, not very many, but he just loves topwater and he'll throw it. And you know, like I said, if a bass is 5 foot under the water, I guess that if it sees a shad, it may take advantage of that. Think it's just a shad bust on the surface. But it's not like the bass say to themselves, I can't go to the surface, in the wintertime. They can do it. They don't do it very often. But the
Gotcha.
best the best topwater day or the tournament I ever had in my life was at Lake of the Ozarks in 52-degree water, 50, 51, 52-degree water on a buzzbait. I mean, they will bite a topwater good when that water's close to 50 even.
Wow, that's a good deal. I should have stuck with it. I tried to do the buzzbait on Grand Lake challenge. I think I was in too dirty of water, to be honest. I should have been clear water, unfortunately. But I should have stuck with it. That would have been good. Anyways, let's jump to our last one here, Randy. Our last saying. Everyone's heard this one before, and I want to get your opinion on this, Randy, because this is a classic, especially for guys who really like throwing big swim baits. Bigger baits catch bigger bass. I think this is a little bit of the male adrenaline, testosterone, whatever it is, kicking in. Bigger baits, bigger bass. What are your thoughts on this saying, Randy? Is this ring true all the time? Or is this right? Is this wrong? If you're trying to win a tournament, should you just tie on the biggest bait you can, a 1 ounce spinner bait, a 10XZ crankbait, and a 10-inch glide bait? Does that improve your chances of catching big fish and winning tournaments?
I think that, man, that is a really difficult question. Obviously, your odds go way up as far as, catching big fish on that. You can look at, like a lot of you guys know Oliver Nye out there, and got a deal called Big Bass Dreams. That's all he does is fish giant baits. He catches big bass, but, he also has days he doesn't catch anything out there. I think that it's a combination of two things. I think it's a combination of the technique you're using, the bait, and I think it's area related. And I'll give you guys a prime example of what I'm talking about here. I was fishing the Bassmaster top 100 tournament at Lake Gunnersville several years ago, 20 years ago, and I found this one grass bed that was off the main river. It was perfectly positioned for big fish. It was right off the main river. It was at the mouth of a big bay. It was a post spawn tournament, and there were some fish that had moved off of that bay out to this grass bed, and I was catching them on a Bomber Model A crankbait, and I was catching, 2.5 pounders on it. First day of the tournament, I went out there, and I knew I couldn't do any good with 2.5 pounders, so I tied on a big 1 ounce spinnerbait and started fishing it over that same grass that I was catching the 2.5 pounders on the crankbait on, and caught 25 pounds on the big spinnerbait that day and led the tournament the first day. So that's a prime example of what I'm talking about. If you have an area that has the potential for big fish, there are certain key lures that they're going to generate those bigger strikes. Now, yeah, maybe I would have caught an oddball 4 or 5 pounder on the crankbait, but most of the time you have got to have a bait that either displaces a lot of water or puts out a big profile to consistently catch quality fish, and you have to throw it in the right area. If you're not throwing it in the right area, catching a big one's going to be random. And big fish come randomly. I mean, they really do. I'll give you another example. This is another tournament at Lake Gunnersville, and this was back, man, like 1990. I didn't know much about bass fishing there, and I was fishing. Back then, they called them fat gitses. This was before the tubes came out, and it was a fat gitset just on a jig head. Fished it on 6 pound line, and I went down to the Lake Gunnersville Dam where they have where the lock goes through, and I was getting some bites throwing this fat gitset along the concrete walls of the lock, and that was practice. So that night we were back in the room, and a couple of the guys I was staying with I told him, I go, yeah, I think I'm gonna start out on the concrete walls at the dam with the gets it. And one of the buddies in my room, he goes, Randy, that's the most stupid idea I've ever heard. What do you think you're going to do? You're going to get a 7-pounder out of nowhere on a fat gets it, for suspended fish out there? Because I was just catching like 2-pounders, 2.5-pounders. Sure enough, I went out there the first day, and on the end of the lock where you lock in, I casted that gets out there and caught a 7-pounder that first day of the tournament on the gets it on 6-pound line. And so you can get them random like that, but most of the time you got to be in the right place with the right bait.
That's a good story. Yeah, that's one thing I found too with it. There's a couple situations where I really pull out the really big baits. The big baits are great when you know you're fishing around really big fish. If you're on a lake that just has big ones in it, or you're in an area like Randy says where you know you're dealing with 4 and 5 and 6 pounders, a bigger bait will definitely generate a bigger bite. But going and throwing a giant swim bait in an area where most of the fish are a pound to 2-pound fish is not going to magically generate a 5 or 6 pounder. If there is a 5 or 6 pounder there, they may go after it, but also you have to have the right conditions for that. And that's one thing that's actually would change this statement, Randy. Instead of saying bigger baits catch bigger bass, you have to say bigger baits in the right conditions catch bigger bass. In the right conditions is very important to add into that statement, because one anecdote you can see is like Oliver Nye fished the Opens. He's an absolute stick with that giant swim bait, and he won the Big Bass Bash $100,000, and he threw that big swim bait all day long for 2 or 3 days straight, won that Lake of the Ozarks tournament, but he only got 2 or 3 bites all day. He then fished the Opens this year, threw the big swim bait, and he was struggling in a lot of the tournaments because he would get 1 or 2 really big bites a day, but not be able to fill out a limit, or maybe some days the conditions just never set up right for that bait, and he never got a big bite on it, and he just caught some smaller ones. So there's a time and a place to throw these big baits, and understanding when that time and place is extremely critical. To give you a couple examples, if I was going to go out here, for example, to Lake Dardanelle, there are times and places on Lake Dardanelle where I've caught them on big 7-inch swim baits. I caught them on 6 and 7-inch flutter spoons, giant spooks that are 7 inches long, 6 inches long, like saltwater spooks. And usually what you're getting in these situations, I can't show you any of the spots or my friends will get really mad at me, but in a lot of these areas you're going to have, I'll show you a community hole. We'll go back over here. A lot of times you're going to have big gizzard shad that pull into these areas, and you'll have 8 to 10-inch gizzard shad. And they'll literally be 10 inches long. And those 4, 5, 6, 7-pound bass will come in and eat those giant gizzard shad. So the bigger the bait you throw, the better. But in that situation, you're dealing with very big forage, big gizzard shad. Same thing happens in a lot of these lakes that have gizzard shad. If you can find the big gizzard shad, you can get them to trigger on a bigger bait. Another situation you might have that I've seen before is, even if you're not catching them necessarily on big gizzard shad, there are certain lakes that have giant crawfish. Now I know like on Lake Maumelle, they used to fish a lot, there's some areas where there's some giant crawfish, some 5, 6, 7-inch crawfish, some jumbos. And those bigger crawfish are going to set up, and you can catch them on a bigger jig, a bigger football jig, a bigger, crankbait, stuff like that, if they have those big forage. Same thing with bigger bluegill, and sometimes the bass even feed on crappie if you're on the right lakes. If you're on a tilapia lake or a trout lake, the bigger forage, you can get away with bigger baits. Even though if your forage isn't that big, I know there was a tournament over here on Fort Loudon where Tellico, Fort Loudon, where are we? Here we go. For the Bassmaster Classic, and I know that Chris Zaldane, he caught a big bag of fish the second day of the tournament, over 20 pounds, just running up and down the river. I can't remember if he was fishing Loudon or Tellico, but he was just running up and down the river, running some channel swing banks and just different areas, and he was throwing a mag draft swim bait, 6-inch swim bait, throwing it down these banks, and he caught 20 pounds one day. The current was flowing that day, the wind was blowing, the sun was up. The next day, there was no wind, no current, and the conditions were just basically slick calm, and he didn't catch a single quality fish. I think he either zeroed or caught like 1 fish that day. And he caught the biggest bag of the tournament the day before. So without the right conditions, throwing that big bait is not going to generate a single bite. And even if the bait fish weren't that big on these areas, maybe the fact that the wind was blowing, the current was moving, those bass were really aggressive to that bigger meal, and they weren't really worried about whether a shad should be that size or not. All the current and the wind was just throwing off their sense of perspective, and they just went for the big bait. So if the conditions are perfect, those big baits will generate really big bags of fish, just like Randy's story with the big spinnerbait. But if you had a day where it was post front, no current, no wind, that spinnerbait might not be very good, and you might only be able to get those fish to bite on a little worm or a little, shad wrap crankbait or whatever it is. So you have to make sure that if you're going through these strategies, guys, you have to be discerning. And if you look at all these statements, there's always a little bit of a caveat there. It's not just bigger baits catch bigger fish. That's a great billboard saying, but really, bigger baits in the right conditions catch bigger fish. It's the same thing for all of these. For the first one, never leave fish to find fish. Never leave biting fish to find fish. You have to make sure you don't miss out those key little differences. Or just changing up the terminology a little bit. Like, they caught them deep today. Instead, say they caught them offshore, because deep is relative depending on the lake. And then finally, we have fish slow-moving baits in cold water. And instead of saying fish slow-moving baits, move baits slowly in cold water. These little semantics, the changing of the words, can be very critical in bass fishing, especially with these sayings. Would you agree with that, Randy?
No doubt. Real quick, I'll answer a question Terry Batista asked about the spinnerbait I was talking about. Terry, that was a 1 ounce spinnerbait with a single number 8 Colorado Big Thumper.
Wow.
On that. By the way, check out Terry's site, Bass Fishing Archives. Awesome. One of my favorite sites to watch in there. But yeah, back to the real quick here about the lure deal. Another thing I'll tell you about that, Johnny. One of the things I found out about that, as far as the best lure to catch those big ones most of the time, is it also has to, it's relative also to the type of cover and the water clarity that you're fishing, because sometimes there are certain baits that will work situationally based upon water clarity in the cover, and that can change, day to day, that type of stuff. So a lot of it is just experimentation until you hit upon the right thing that they really want. But most of the time when I've caught my big bags of fish, they came on the same bait. It's not like I changed it up or anything, but just the same bait and committing to that. And one thing about catching big bag of fish, guys, if you're going to catch a big bag of fish, it requires a commitment to do so. It requires either a commitment to the bait you're fishing or a commitment to the area you're fishing. I've never caught a big bag of fish unless I committed to one of two of those things. For
sure. That's some good stuff right there. And there's a lot of great comments, guys. Appreciate all the back and forth comments and all of the just the talk in the chat. I always appreciate everyone interacting and sharing their knowledge, giving tips and stuff like that. It's always really helpful. Chad Johnson over here asks, "Hey Johnny, what's the best area on Lake Conway? Any area that doesn't have metal spikes sticking 2 inches out of the water that will scrape the bottom of a fiberglass boat." I've never fished Conway before because I don't have an aluminum boat, and I'm not going to fish Lake Conway. It's loaded. There's giant fish in there, and I know it's really good. It was also very close to the house I grew up in. It was actually like the second closest lake to me. I never fished it, though, because I've heard horror stories of guys destroying their fiberglass boats out there. So, yeah, I don't hang out on Conway, but it's a really good lake. But I don't have any good spots for you, unfortunately. Never been out there, which is kind of crazy. And then let's see here. Jesse says, "I want some beef jerky, Johnny." That is right. We need to do our Bridgeford beef jerky giveaway. I got so caught up in everything. For those who stuck around, though, hey, you guys are lucky ones. If you guys are still here, make sure to leave a comment on the YouTube video itself, not here in the chat, but actually go down on the actual YouTube video and leave a comment. Helps us with the algorithm and the analytics and stuff for YouTube. So if you leave a comment on the actual YouTube video in the comments and let us know what your favorite fishing saying is, like the ones we've talked about. Never leave fish to find fish, or bigger baits catch bigger bass. Let us know what your favorite saying is like that, and maybe if you think it's true or not true in your experience. I thought of these 4, and that's all we had time for, but I'd love to hear more. Maybe we can discuss more in the future. So let us know what your favorite bass fishing saying is, and if you think it's right or wrong. And if you do, you'll have a chance to win a free case of Bridgeford beef jerky, 12 packages. And if you come back next week to the live stream, 7 p.m. Central Standard Time on Tuesday every week, you'll find out if you won the drawing, and we'll pick one comment at random from the comment section and send you 12 packages of Bridgeford beef jerky, full-size packs, not the little sample packs. It's full-size packs of beef jerky. I know a lot of guys on the stream here have already won some, so shout out to Bridgeford for sponsoring the Fish Moment podcast. Also, huge shout out to the Bass Tank. Again, head to thebasstank.com and check out their deal on the Live Scope bundle with the unit and the transducer for $2,200. Great deal there for the holidays, thebasstank.com. So that is it, Randy. That's what we got. One other thing for those who are still here and want a little bit more help on the lake, we have some really cool stuff always over on our website, fishthemoment.com. If you guys are interested in getting any sort of help on where to fish, what to do this winter, check out our lake breakdowns. We have lake breakdowns for Randy in the shallow water. We have Matt Steffen, who joined the team, who's doing a lot of smallmouth lake breakdowns. And you can see he has a lot of spring breakdowns for some northern lakes that we've never done before. He's also working on some smallmouth breakdowns for southern reservoirs like Lake Cumberland, Lake Cherokee, Dale Hollow, Lake 10 Killer in Oklahoma. All the lakes that have smallmouth in them, even Table Rock and stuff. He's going to be doing smallmouth specific lake breakdowns. So if you want to go catch some trophy smallmouths on some southern lakes, we'll have those up here in the near future. And also, Randy has a ton of his winter breakdowns here as always. He keeps adding more every single week, so make sure to check these out. A bunch of winter lake breakdowns where we give you 40 GPS waypoints that you can transfer straight to your fish finder with detailed area descriptions, keys to fishing the lake, and a guide on how to transfer those waypoints right onto the fish finder. You can check all of this stuff out, guys, if you're interested, over on our website, fishthemoment.com. Awesome stuff. Well, Randy, I think we debunked some common fishing myths, some common fishing misconceptions. Hopefully that's helpful to you guys. And again, leave a comment down below with what your favorite one is, and you'll have a chance to win a free case of Bridgeford beef jerky. And other than that, Randy, anything else before we sign off?
Yeah, thanks for tuning in, guys. Much appreciated again. And we're also back to the lake map breakdowns. We're doing personal map breakdowns too. So if you guys have a little lake that's not listed on our map catalog there, you can put in a request for a personal breakdown, and we can do that. But again, much appreciated you taking out a little time out of your Tuesday evening, and see you guys next week, hopefully.
Yeah, appreciate it, guys. Thanks for all the support again. Thanks for all the people who are on the app as well, the Deep Dive app. Keep sending feedback. Anything you guys can send, positive, negative, what you like about the app, the interface, anything. Anyone who's in the beta, just send over an email with just some sort of feedback. Anything you think of really helps so that we can continue to improve the app and add features and add things, especially post-launch. So more info we can get, the better we can make the app. So again, appreciate all the support, guys. Appreciate everything we do here. And also thanks to all of the super chats we got tonight from Angling Inbox, from Martin Chance, from Cam Martin, Dustin Overstreet. Thanks, guys, for the super chats tonight. Really, really appreciate that. Hope you guys have a great night. We'll see you next Tuesday, same time, same place. Best of luck on the water.